Hello and welcome to the analysis of the Hindu newspaper dated November 24th, 2022. In this video, we are going to talk about El Nina, La Nina. We are also going to talk about Mr. Putin, who holds a significant amount of oil in his reserves, right? So these articles are going to be very important, very significant for the civil services examination. Now we are going to discuss just two important newspaper articles, but this doesn't discard the fact that other articles are also important. So the list of important newspaper articles is present in your screen. You can go through these articles in the Hindu newspaper and have a blind faith that other articles are not very important. So if this is very clear to you, do subscribe to this channel to never miss an update from the bureaucratic way, and join us on Telegram as well to get all the important PDFs important for the civil services examination. If this is very clear to you, let's head to the first important newspaper article. Now, this particular newspaper article is regarding the El Nino and La Nina and how they are affecting the weather patterns, right? So, this is a study. We are going to discuss it in very detail. So, a new study projects that climate change will significantly impact El Nino La Nina weather patterns approximately by 2030, a decade before what was earlier predicted. So, earlier it was predicted that by 2040, El Nino and La Nina weather patterns are going to be there, but it is now being projected according to this particular study that it is going to happen by 2030. Now this particular phenomena, that is El Nino and La Nina, is going to have an impact on the global climate disruptions, right? So how they are going to affect the climate change, we are going to discuss it, but we need to first understand what is El Nino, what is La Nina. We are also going to understand what is ENSO, and then we are going to discuss what is written in this particular study. So what is El Nino? So El Nino is basically the warming of seawater in the central east equatorial Pacific, and this occurs every few years. Now during El Nino, surface temperatures in the equatorial Pacific, that is EP, rise, and the trade winds, that is east-west winds that blow near the equator weaken. When these particular winds have weakened in the equator, what will happen? Normally, easterly trade winds blow from the Americas towards the Asia, but due to the El Nino, they falter and change direction to turn into westerlies, bringing warm water from the western Pacific towards the Americas. Now, this particular phenomena is results in what? A reduction in the upwelling. Now, upwelling is this great phenomena which brings the nutrient-rich water from the down or the depth of the ocean to the surface, where the phytoplanktons eat them. Now, if there is not going to be enough of upwelling due to the El Nino, what is going to happen? It is going to have a reduction in the phytoplanktons in the sea surface. Now, if you are not going to have phytoplanktons in the sea surface, what is going to happen? The fishes are not going to eat the phytoplanktons. They are going to starve. Now, the starvation of the fishes is going to have an impact on the other organisms which are higher in the food chain, which are going to eat the fishes. Now, this particular phenomena, if this is very clear to you, then we'll head to the next phenomenon. What happens? Now, the warm waters also carry tropical species towards the colder areas, which disrupts multiple ecosystems. So multiple ecosystems are going to be damaged by this particular phenomenon called El Nino. And apart from it, since the Pacific covers almost 1/3 of the earth, changes in its temperature and subsequent alteration of the winds patterns disrupt global weather patterns. And apart from it, El Nino is going to have a major impact on the climate as well. So the northern US and the Canada is going to have dry, warm winter, and the US Gulf Coast and southeastern US is going to receive a lot of flooding. And apart from it, there is going to be drought in the Indonesia as well as the Australia. So this is the major impact of the El Nino. Now we will talk about the La Nina. La Nina is basically the opposite of the El Nino. What is going to happen in El Nino? It is going to be opposite in the La Nina. So now in La Nina sees the colder than average sea temperature in the equatorial Pacific region. Trade winds are stronger than usual. In the case of El Nino, what was happening? Trade winds were milder than usual. In this particular case, in La Nina, the trade winds are stronger than usual. which is going to push warmer water towards the Asia. Now on the American west coast, upwelling increases. Now if there is an increase in the upwelling, what will happen? The nutrient rich water will come to the surface. Now the Pacific cold waters close to the Americas push jet streams. Now jet stream northwards. So now these jet streams are going to be pushed northwards. Then it is going to have a significant impact on the climate. So by the way, jet streams are basically these narrow bands of strong winds in the upper atmosphere which affect the temperature of that particular area. Now, what it is going to happen? What is going to happen? It is going to be a drought in the southern US and it is going to be a heavy rainfall in the Canada. And apart from it, there are also going to be heavy floods in the Australia. Just the opposite of the El Nino. What happened in the El Nino? In El Nino, the Canada and what? The northern US were having drier season. But in this case, drier season is going to happen in the southern US. And there's going to be heavy floods in the Australia. Right? So these are some of the impacts on the environment of the La Nina. Let's now talk about what is the ENSO. Now ENSO basically is El Nino Southern Oscillation. Now we will cut short it. First one, El Nino, we have understood, but what basically is this southern oscillation? So southern oscillations are large scale changes in the sea level pressure in the tropical Pacific region. There is going to be sea level pressure changes in the tropical Pacific region. Now the ENSO is basically the combination of El Nino plus La Nina. This is very significant. If you understand it, you are going to basically understand the entire ENSO. ENSO is basically what? El Nino plus La Nina. Game over, right? This is it. Now, this particular diagram shows how there is neutral weather. Now, the effect of El Nino. Now, we also have effect of La Nina over here. If you are going to understand it, you are going to understand it through these particular diagrams very well, right? So now, what are the findings of the study? We have talked about the El Nino, we have talked about the La Nina, we have talked about the ENSO. So what are the findings of this particular study? So this particular study says that ENSO's scale is significant enough to influence global climate. Which is going to happen? The second point it raises is that increase in the sea surface temperature variability from ENSO in the eastern Pacific will emerge around 2030 and more than a decade earlier than that of the central Pacific ENSO. And if CP and EP are not separated, SST, that is the sea surface temperature variability from the ENSO, will occur almost 4 decades earlier than previously suggested, which is going to have a various impacts on our lifestyles as well, right? If there are going to be heavy floods in areas where a flood is not expected, then it is going to have an impact on the lives, right? And changes in the equatorial Pacific will be visible first due to stronger increase in the EP and so rainfall response leading to increased SST variability. Now these are the impact which is going to happen on the global scale, right? So but how it is going to affect the India's monsoons? Because monsoon is something we look forward to. If there are any changes in the monsoon, that means that there is an effect on Indian temperature, Indian weather, right? So now in India, El Nino causes weak rainfall and more heat, while La Nina intensified rainfall across South Asia, particularly in the India's northwest and the Bangladesh during the monsoon. Now if there is an increase in the monsoon period, then what it is going to signify? It is going to signify a La Nina event. So there was a surplus rain this year, right? You all have noted it. So now at present, like the rest of the globe, India is also witnessing an extended triple dip La Nina, and that is why there was surplus rain in the September. Alright, so this phenomena, that is El Nina, La Nina, is going to have a major impact in our lives. And that is why we need to understand this particular newspaper article. And this article is going to be very important, very significant for the geography section. That is GS paper 1, right? So this is it regarding this particular newspaper article. Let's now head to the next important newspaper article. Now this particular newspaper article is regarding the G7, that is group of 7, and the group of 7 is looking at Russian oil price cap of $65 to $70 per barrel, says a European Union diplomat. So now earlier we have noted that there was a complete ban on what? On the Brent crude oil from the Russia. Now G7 is talking about putting a cap on this particular crude oil. All right, is it softening? We do not know. Is the G7 working in its own interest? Absolutely yes. This is what happens in the geopolitics, right? You work for your own country, that is what is there, right? Nobody is giving you free meals. Everybody is working for their own sake. Everybody is working in their own self interest. So now the group 7 is looking at a price cap on Russian seaborne oil in the range of $65 to $70 per barrel, a European Union diplomat said on Wednesday. And the G7, including the US as well as the whole of the European Union and Australia, are stated to implement the price cap on the seaborne exports of Russian oil on December 5 as a part of sanctions intended to punish Moscow for the invasion of the Ukraine. But why is this particular phenomenon happening, or what is going to happen? Now it is going to prohibit, or this particular move is going to prohibit shipping, insurance and reinsurance firms from handling cargoes of Russian crude unless it is sold for no more than maximum price set by the G7 and its allies. Right now, if it is going to put, or G7 countries and its allies are going to put a cap on the Russian crude oil, then what is going to happen? The Russia is going to play according to the rules of the West, and that is what the West wants it at this particular point of time. And moreover, they need oil in order to lower the prices of the oil in the international market, right? But here's a contradiction. Now the production costs are estimated to be around $20 per barrel for the Russians. Now if they are selling at $65 to $70 per barrel, then there is going to be profitability for the Russians. There is going to be profitability for Mr. Putin. Right, so this is the basic contradiction. The G7 and other allies, on the one hand, they are saying that they are going to put more sanctions, and at the same time they are going to give profit to the Russians. Now it can be concluded that the G7 is working in its own interest. G7 countries are working in its own interest, and this is the basic contradiction over here, right? So now we are not interested in these kind of contradictions or the politics of this or the geopolitics of it. What we are interested in is G7. What is the G7? Now G7 is basically an informal bloc of industrialized democracies. Now they meet annually, and what do? They discuss issues of common interest like global economic governance. They talk about the international security, and they also talk about the energy policies. Now, if we talk about the member states, these are very rich countries like the France, Germany, Italy, UK from the Europe. We have Japan from the Asian subcontinent. From the Asian continent. We have the United States and Canada from the American continent, right? So these are basically the member states. Now, if we combine Russia also, which earlier was the part of this particular group, then it was called G8 in 2014. Until 2014 it was called G8. In 2014 it was reduced to G7. Now there's also another organization which is, or an informal organization, which is G20. Now G20 is basically all the other countries which are emerging economies combined with this G8, right? So all of these G20 holds very much importance, and there's also a debate about how G7 has lost its relevance and G20 is becoming more relevant. We'll talk about it later, but first let's discuss what is the background of this particular organization or this particular G7, right? So G7 has its roots in the informal meeting of the finance ministers of France, West Germany, the US, Great Britain and Japan in the wake of the 1973 oil crisis. In 1973 oil crisis happened, and the world, or all these countries, realized that we need to have a group of member states, which is going to ensure that this particular situation doesn't arise in the future. So in 1975, 6 countries, mainly France, West Germany, Italy, Japan, United Kingdom and United States, formed a group of 6. Now this particular group of 6 was joined by Canada in 1976, and it was named as G7. In 1997, one another member was also included, that is Russia was included, and this particular G7 group then became G8. In 2014, Russia invaded the Crimea region, or according to the Russians, it freed the Crimean region, whatever you say. Right, in 2014, the G8 other countries apart from the Russia got very angry with the Russia, and Russia was expelled as a member, and this particular G8 then became the G7, and presently it is G7 comprising of 7 member states, and hence the name G7. Right. So now how does it function? Now it holds a summit on an annual basis, and it is hosted by the group of members on a rotation basis, and the host countries not only holds the G7 presidency but also sets the agenda for the subsequent year. Sorry, for that particular year. And apart from it, these particular meetings are very high level, so there must be some groundwork going on. So the groundwork for the summit, including the matters to be discussed and follow-up meetings, is done by the Sherpas. Now Sherpas are basically generally personal representatives or members of the diplomatic staff such as ambassadors. So this is how it functions. It is not a formal block, it doesn't have a secretariat, it is an informal block, right? So now let's talk about how G7 has lost its power. We have talked about the fact that G20 is now taking over instead of the G7. Now the first thing happened is the 2008 financial crisis, when the G7 members were not able to control the 2008 global financial crisis, and hence emerged the need of the countries or other countries to step in. Now G20, which was formed in 1998, something like that, in the wake of the 1997 financial crisis, 20 member organization was formed, in which the emerging countries were also included, right? So with the emergence of the G20, G7 is losing its relevance, and apart from it, the forum's small and relatively homogeneous members, they say that they promote collective decision making, but what happens is that there is a lack of follow through, and that its membership excludes important emerging powers like China, India, Turkey. All these countries are excluded from the membership, and that is why the G7 is losing its relevance day in and day out, right? So this is it regarding the G7, and this is it regarding this particular newspaper article, and this is it. Thank you from my side. Do like and share the video and subscribe to this channel. Have a good evening. Bye.